Nothing in this podcast is intended as investment advice, and the people in this podcast may hold positions in the stocks they talk about. Do not buy any investment based solely on a tip or recommendation. Please do your own research.
Welcome to the Midweek Takeaway. Today we have Coinsilium. We have Malcolm and Eddy with us for a chat about the RNS today, which basically talked about the last 6 months, which was finished actually before all the stuff actually did finish, but we'll get to that as we talk. So I'll come to you first, Malcolm. Tell me what your thoughts are and your statement and in the RNS.
Sure. Thank you, Kevin. Well, look, I mean, we have to produce these reports for the market. That's, we have a requirement to report annual results at least around 6 months after the year end, and our interims for the first 6 months of the year within 3 months of the close of the period. So we've been working on this for quite a while, and in the meantime, while we're working on it, and as I say, everything's going on with the market, so it's been very kind of tricky to get everything tidied up into the format which it needs to be in to actually be released by the deadline, which is the end of September. Additionally to that, which has been quite frustrating, is that you go into a close period where the main reason for the close period is to prevent directors from trading during that time, but it also means that you have to sort of be very careful what you say, and particularly since we had such an active period, we can't give any signal or any kind of any forward-looking statements which could impact people's perception of what to expect in the results, even though they could see very clearly what was likely to be in the results because of all the announcements that were made. But look, it's we're now kind of free to talk much more openly. During the first 6 months, looking back on it, it was a transformational time for us. And when the dust has settled, how meaningful this is to the company can't be understated. We've got, as mentioned, in total, including the after period results figures, we've raised approximately 17 million pounds. So, and that obviously has been deployed into the Bitcoin that we hold. So, job done to the point that we have managed to demonstrate that we have got the ability to do what we need to do to actually set up the treasury to actually have the exposure to Bitcoin. Not job done as far as how far this will go, but we are a victim of the market conditions at the moment, which have been vacillating hugely. So as much as I'm very happy with the progress that we've made, I'm not very happy about the way the market is behaving, and it's much more broad based than us. We just happen to be a relatively medium-sized ship as far as the UK is concerned, but in terms of the overall Bitcoin landscape, we're a small ship. So we're hitting the waves and we're getting rocked about, and sentiment is pretty volatile. But part of it is used to it because we've been in the Bitcoin space, and you get a very hardened stomach in the Bitcoin space. But I think a lot of investors probably haven't got that resilience because they're not used to this kind of volatility. So a long answer, I'm sorry, but the bottom line is we're pretty confident going forward that we know how to navigate this, but there's going to be a lot of volatility, and I'm very confident with everything we've got going to differentiate ourselves. We're going to do very well.
Eddy, give me your take on your statement as well in the thing, and then we'll come on to talk about the current situation.
Yes, sure. So for me, I think in the statement we explained that we have had a very good first 6 months, as Malcolm was saying. I mean, the people who are listening should understand that we have had this very successful fundraise mainly between May and August, and this enabled us to really increase the assets of the company. So, for example, although the expenses remained very close to being on par with the previous period, the assets have trebled in value. And of course, since then, we also mentioned in the statement that we have purchased more Bitcoin. So we expect the assets to increase strongly by the end of this year, obviously. I think in the statement we also explained that we are not a pure play Bitcoin treasury company. Bitcoin treasury is something that we have developed since we announced it in March, the launch of Forza in Gibraltar. But we obviously remain in very close contact with our different investments in our portfolio. And I think the statement draws a bit more attention to the fact that we have been running the company for 10 years now, more than 10 years, and we have been making investments over the last few years, and this is what we are also focusing on. Some of these investments should start becoming more liquid and potentially bring us some interesting revenues, or let's say investment yield or dividends. Yeah.
Okay, so Eddy, at today's market cap is slightly below the value of your Bitcoin plus cash. So you're currently valued at basically less than £1 million or minus £1 million. So how does it feel to be valued at minus £1 million?
Well, I think, first of all, in the broad context, you have to see that, unfortunately, let's say across the markets, I mean, as the listeners may have heard, there have been many Bitcoin treasury plays coming on public markets all around the world, and some, of course, in the UK. And I think most of the companies, if not all, have been affected in some way by the fact that we have been a bit on a roller coaster in terms of liquidity, volume, and obviously the share price has followed as well. So I think we're in a very similar position to other companies in that sense that are in the same sector. So we are broadly affected the same way. But as I was saying, we are still. I believe that in a way the market is underestimating the investment portfolio and the work we have been doing over the last few years, investing and follow up on investments, because that's not the case of all companies, of course, that have bought Bitcoin recently.
Yeah, I think even looking at all of the Bitcoin, yes, they've all suffered in terms of NAVs, but yours particularly is now below NAV. Why do you think the market is valuing Coinsilium as essentially a Bitcoin tracker and not giving credit for the wider business? That I suppose is the question everybody's asking.
The NAV is not below the Bitcoin value, but it is below, as you were saying, the combined value of cash, Bitcoin, and investment. Yes. So just to make a little parenthesis about that. Yeah.
I don't think there are many treasury plays out there who have a model that is anything like or close to ours. So the only metric, and we did point this out in the results, is that those common, often used metric is this MNAV against your Bitcoin. So if people are looking at that particularly and ignoring the other aspects of the business, then you can see why that could occur. So it's our job to ensure, and this is something we said in the statement, that we differentiate ourselves and show how different our model is, so that we should be at least consider our other investments and then make a determination as to whether those investments are valuable or worth anything against what the Bitcoin's worth. And I think it's probably early in this kind of this sector for differentiation to actually take gain any ground, because most of these companies are still pure Bitcoin plays.
Yeah, there is a lot of them that are pure Bitcoin. So how would you quantify the value of that IP that you just talked about? I mean, you got venture investments, you've got the advisory capabilities that you used before. Eddy, we talked about that the last time. How do we value that IP? Beyond the capabilities beyond, we've got some Bitcoin.
But to be clear, we're following accounting rules which are pretty strict in the UK. So, I mean, obviously, like public companies, we have our accounts audited, and so in terms of we have two types mainly of investments. So we have investments that are equity investments, and we have investments which are going to be paid out as an allocation of tokens. For both, our approach is very conservative, very reasonable. Most of them are around cost, and we are, of course, we're not kind of monetizing already what we see as a potential value that it will get in the future. So we're very conservative on that. So I would say the book value, which is apparent in the statement, is around £2 million. But obviously, we have not invested in those companies to stay at cost. So we believe that there is a very high potential on the investment, various degrees, depending on the stage at which they are, the sector, and so forth. So I think overall, we have been very conservative in the statements and in the financial statements, but we're certainly hopeful in the reality of things that we will come to a very interesting value and high potential return. But of course, it takes time for both either equity or tokens to be valued higher, depending on liquidity events, depending on token generation, etc. So there are different ways for Coinsilium to get value out of these investments.
Yeah, before we even started with the Bitcoin treasury, the IP, as you call it, and the investments was all we had. And we were always valued at a premium to those. And there wasn't any Bitcoin other than a marginal amount there. But it's the minute you take on the Bitcoin that this problem occurs. So I don't think it's a quirk of the market. It's just a quirk of where we are at the moment. And I think markets, there's some inefficiencies in the market at the moment. There's a lot of hysteria and craziness generally. So I think that's probably a factor of there's that factor at the moment. But I don't think it'll take long before people start appreciating the other things that we're doing, because particularly with, say, yellow, it's coming to a critical point now. So that token launch, as we said, is expected within this quarter. Everything is lined up. We've explained what the impact will be for us in terms of how we account for that. We know where that looks like it's going, and there's a few catalysts could change the landscape as well. But at the moment, as I said, we're put into a basket of Bitcoin treasuries, and a lot of the people who look at that ignore the other things we've got. And it's our job to start doing more to communicate about the other aspects of what we have in the business and how we differentiate ourselves, because that's the other thing I believe that we'll see in this market. And because of more competition coming in, more Bitcoin treasury plays launching, there will be a need for differentiation.
Yeah, for sure. Listen, you are valued currently at less than NAV, not ultimately just the Bitcoin, but the Bitcoin plus your cash and plus the other assets. So the situation has to be that something has to give. Either, as Eddy said, the valuations of some of these things cannot be written as anything but what you invested until you have something that is viable, if you like. In other words, that is tradable, and then it becomes a different story. But the question I want to pose is, and this I suppose is for all Bitcoin treasuries, but we're talking to you guys, 182 Bitcoins. Surely those Bitcoins aren't just going to sit there and twiddle their thumbs. You're going to be able to generate some monies from those Bitcoins. I mean, this is one of the differentiations that I can see coming through, is how can we use what we currently have to give extra value to shareholders.
I think at the moment we're focused on the yield kind of mechanisms are not all straightforward. We intended to use a DeFi model when we first started to actually generate yields, and that became a little bit problematic. And we are reviewing various other methods to actually generate yield. But Bitcoin in itself, from a yield generating perspective, is quite limited. It's not like the other tokens which you can stake and get up to 8% a year. So you have to be kind of very cognizant of what you're doing with your Bitcoin. And you also don't want to take the kind of risks that people have taken in the past, which probably a lot of people aren't even aware of, which end up with using parties like what happened to Three Arrows, which, you start sort of giving trust to other people in this, and then you've got counterparty risk. So it's not that we won't look at yield, but we want to make sure the yield mechanisms is sustainable and is going to not be detrimental to our ambitions going forward. So Eddy, maybe you could expand on that a little bit.
Yeah, and Eddy, I'm going to throw in another
options,
question to you as well. Is that we talked previously about where is Bitcoin going? Now we've gone up to 130, come back down to about 110, I think it was. Now we're at 112, 113. Yeah, a few days ago, I think it was 116, 117. So there is no doubt there's volatility in this good old Bitcoin, because that's the nature of the beast at the minute. though I perceive that that's going to be less as time goes by with the institutional uptake. But what is your plan in terms of what you think the Bitcoin could actually be worth going forward, whether that be 12 months, 24 months, 36 months? What is your thoughts?
Well, traditionally, we had kind of similar dynamics after what we call the Bitcoin halving, which is the cut off 50% of how much Bitcoin miners get when they successfully mine a block. Now, of course, this has to be always compounded with the macroeconomic context. So interestingly, in the last, let's say we could call bull cycle, coincided with COVID, which was a bull cycle as well for the financial markets in general, and it was a bull cycle for crypto. And this time, at the moment, we are normally in the tail end of the positive cycle following a Bitcoin halving, but we're also entering, I mean, obviously with decreasing interest rates on their last meeting and possibly decreasing it further, we're also in a completely new kind of macro direction where possibly the US dollar interest goes down, and that usually brings cash into riskier assets, stocks, and obviously crypto. So Bitcoin for the moment has been staying for a very long time above $100,000, which is a psychological price, which has been an interesting factor. It has not. We didn't see a massive drawdown in Bitcoin price, and typically October to early December is typically a good time as well for Bitcoin. But if we look on a longer trend, again, it's very much dependent on the macro economy, and of course macro is very much dependent on the health of the American economy. And for the moment, I would say the articles I'm reading are pointing towards lower rates and more money coming into riskier assets again. So possibly opening up a good cycle, a longer cycle for higher Bitcoin. In a conference, in an event that was set up by Peter Howells back in June, I believe, or June or July, I gave a prediction of Bitcoin at 250,000 by next year in a year from then, so about June or July 2026. I maintain this, and so therefore we are overall optimistic on Bitcoin price.
Yeah, we've never been here before. I mean, let's be brutally honest. I mean, we've never been here before economically, never mind Bitcoin or anything else. Because we're in a situation where I think we're going to have a decreasing valuation of the US dollar, which is going to impart greater value on BTC if it's valued in US dollars. And also, we've never had this much economic instability possibly in the world ever. And you can see that in the price of gold. You can see that in the price of precious metals, as well as what's happening in Ethereum, Bitcoin, etc., etc. How do you perceive that the implementation of the US government, Trump in particular, taking on Bitcoin is going to fundamentally affect that sort of 4-year cycle, if you like? Because I don't see it coming the same way, because we've never had the financial impetus that exists at the minute into Bitcoin.
Yeah, the US always gives a good direction, let's say, to the market. So basically, the fact that the US is even just considering a Bitcoin strategic reserve, it's already a huge step from the earlier years. And the fact that the elected officials in the US, Senate or House of Representatives are looking at laws that are going in favor of Bitcoin reserve or stable coins through the Genius Act or on other types of legislation that helps the crypto sector. All that is definitely giving a direction. And usually it's a direction that other countries are following. So the fact that the SEC is much more in favor of crypto, of digital assets, it's already a huge step, and it has already given some impetus to the whole market. But it will go on. It will go on because the market obviously always wants more. I mean, we know that the same as in traditional markets with stocks, etc. But I think more is coming. So I think overall, you're right that this is unheard of, because obviously in the early years of Bitcoin, we were very, very far from any kind of endorsement by any government, and of course not by the US at the time. So this is very new. And this should have a long-lasting effect on cryptocurrencies, on digital assets. I mean, just looking at the fact that digital assets could become part of pension funds, pension schemes in the US to start with, and that could propagate around the world. I mean, that's already, you know, we're talking about billions, possibly trillions of dollars of market caps of
Yeah.
different companies, institutions. Yeah.
Well, if you listen to Mr. Saylor, he thinks that the US government should take 25% of the Bitcoins in circulation. And subsequently, we'll be talking about a £13 million or $13 million Bitcoin price, which would mean your share price would be £8 just based on the current situation. So that would be a bit bizarre. Maybe not 8, maybe 5, maybe £6, but ultimately there seems to be a wave of this. So I'm coming back to you, Malcolm. There seems to be a wave. We've just had wave 1, and you guys have just read that wave. And from your perspective, you got to be looking at it and saying, hey, this is the market cap of the company. We've got the same number of Bitcoins as the market cap of the company. Surely that was always our goal. Now we've got to show people that we're worth a lot more. What's your thoughts, Malcolm?
That's absolutely the case. We've got to look at the best ways of showing people that we're worth more. And I've always been one to actually, prefer delivering results rather than talking about what we're going to do. I like to under-promise and over-deliver if we can. And some people kind of will look at that as us not giving anything away. Well, it's not entirely that, but it's just that you also don't want to tempt fate. But we've got a lot of things kind of brewing. We've highlighted that in the statement in our interims. But the key is, as you say, we've got to show that, but we've got to show there's more to us and there's more value. It's a question of how we do it. So we're going to be looking at the next big things that we're expecting to happen and give the market a lot more information than we've done to date about the perspectives that we see, and particularly with yellow in play, that's going to be the next one over the next few months that we're going to be focusing on.
I can see that yellow is going to become a good catalyst. Let's see how that all pans out over the coming weeks. And as we've discussed offline before, hopefully we're going to get somebody from yellow to come and talk and give people a greater understanding of what actually it is and how it's going to solve a huge problem in the banking sector.
Well, I mean, Eddy's in contact with them more than I am, but on the same token, we've already planted that seed. So it's going to be more of a coordinated thing that we're going to be doing, and it will tie in with the run up to the token launch as well. So, you'd like to think that the Bitcoin price will take care of itself. And you'd like to think that once this kind of volatility starts shaking through, we'll get back to sort of more kind of, I won't say reliable pricing, because you can't call that, but I think we can sort of expect Bitcoin to start getting some traction, I would have thought, before the end of the year. So if that helps us in that side, and then we can actually start showing more about what's happening, particularly with yellow as they enter the last stages before the launch, I think we've got a great setup. And again, with the accounts out, there's nothing to stop us talking about these things, and we will do so in a paced and managed way, because, as I say, we recognize that, whilst the close period was on, we haven't been able to talk much, and we want to make up for lost time.
And I like the idea that you're going to add Bitcoin when it's accretive to the business and not before. Yeah. And I'm very keen that that's what you're willing to do. And hence the reason why I added to my position in Coin in the last day or two, because I feel that you guys, yes, are a Bitcoin, but I'm basically getting everything, a Bitcoin tracker. Basically, I'm getting everything else for free. And that seems to me like a very sensible investment. So anybody listening to this now, I'm looking at it going, look, there's value here, and we can see what's ahead. If the yellow thing takes off, it could be worth more than your current market cap. It might not be, but it could be, because you just never know how these things are going to work out. But that's not the only game in town. As you said, with the other assets you've got, as they come to fruition, we don't know what they're going to be valued at, but you've got quite a few irons in the fire. And, I also agree with you, Eddie, that I think Bitcoin is going to increase in value. You cannot have this many institutions buying in the limited supply and the thing not go up in price. It's just not possible.
Thank you, Kevin. Just very quickly about, by the way we actually do buy our Bitcoin. We have this treasury policy, which is our Bible. And part of that fundamental process, sort of belief, which is what you refer to, about us not raising money at prices that aren't advantageous just to buy the numbers, is not in our nature. It's not in our kind of psychology. So a lot of people ask us when we're going to buy more Bitcoin, and the answer is, when we can do so at a price that is going to be beneficial for shareholders. Because if shareholders think we're going to raise money tomorrow, they're going to, what is the imperative for them to buy? If they know that we're going to raise money in a responsible, measured way, or, in a value accretive way, then it gives you a lot more confidence to buy in the market.
Indeed. Well, gentlemen, we look forward in the next few weeks and months bringing people up to date with Yellow and with the other progress in the other stocks that you've got. And thanks for coming on the Midweek Takeaway.
Thanks, Kevin.
Thank you, Kevin.
This podcast was brought to you by Roast PR Limited. If you would like to appear on a future episode of The Sunday Roast, please email admin@thesundayroast.net.